In 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Beyond Access series. Thank you for everyone who tried to get in on Wednesday and couldn't get in. I hope you're getting in now. Thank you for everyone who got in and got kicked out halfway through because of our technical difficulties. Tonight, we're hoping it goes all smooth and well, and we can get through this because our related services team is excited to share this information with all of you. And so on that note, as always, if you need any captions or translations, those are available to you through the closed captioning tools. You can click on the CC button, and then on the settings, you can auto translate into a different language. I'm going to say that in Spanish. Si usted necesita traducción en español o en otro idioma, puede hacer los subtítulos en español a través del botón en su pantalla que dice CC y al lado puede cambiarle el idioma a lo que usted quiera. All right. We're going to be using the Q&A function like we always do, so please feel free to enter your questions. The related services team tonight is going to be answering questions specifically about the sensory supports. But if you have any other questions, you please put in your email address or phone number, and somebody from our team will get back to you. So without any further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Suzanne Sanchez, our Senior Director of Therapeutic Services. Good evening, Suzanne.
Oh, great. Thank you, Jose, and thank you, everybody. We are so happy to be able to present to families tonight on the sometimes mysterious topic of sensory integration and sensory supports at home. And leading the presentation tonight are two occupational therapy supervisors, Ms. Kristyn Dandrea and Ms. Jackie Ortiz, who both are experts in the area of sensory integration and sensory supports. Occupational therapists as a whole are trained in how sensory systems operate, how sensory systems function, and how those systems impact students' functioning in the academic and in the home environment. And Jackie and Kristyn this evening are going to walk you through all of those components and end with some valuable resources and easy to implement family-friendly strategies at home. Because as you all know very well, and especially so during this remote learning time, parents are truly partners in related services. And we are so happy to partner with you tonight and share this information. So without further waiting, I'm going to turn this over to Kristyn Dandrea, who is going to start the presentation. Thank you, Kristyn.
Yep. All righty. Hi, everybody. Again, like Suzanne and Jose said, my name is Kristyn Dandrea. I am one of the occupational therapy supervisors with the New York City Department of Education, and I'm so excited to be with you again tonight to talk about sensory supports at home. Just as a bit of an overview, this is kind of what we're going to be looking at tonight. So first, we'll just talk a little bit about what is occupational therapy, since that Jackie and myself are OTs and we supervise OTs, and a lot of time the OTs are the ones that will help to do the detective work in deciding what kind of sensory supports may be helpful for you and your child. We'll also talk about self-regulation and sensory processing and the differences between those two concepts and the similarities. We'll also talk about functions of behavior and the different influencers and motivators that can play a part in your child's behavior, whether challenging or positive. Definitely we'll touch on parents as partners, like Suzanne said, and how really, truly important your collaboration with us is in benefiting your child. And then the star of the show will be the sensory supports, and Jackie's going to share a lot of those that you'll be able to implement easily at home. And then we have some online home activities and, of course, the Q&A at the end. So just to get started, I'm going to read this slide here. This is our related service guiding philosophy. It says the fundamental objective of related services in the DOE is to help maximize each student's ability to achieve his or her educational goals. Related services should always be delivered in the least restrictive environment, and as much as appropriate, schools should integrate them into the classroom. So this basically means that related services must in some way relate to a student's school participation as indicated by the goals on their IEP. So we look to do this in the least restrictive environment to ensure that the student functions as independently as possible alongside his or her peers. So even though the current teletherapy service delivery model looks very different, related services still operate under the same guiding philosophy as during in-school therapy. So let's talk a little bit about what is occupational therapy. So we like to call it OT for short, and it's typically concerned with one's ability to participate in desired daily life activities or occupations. So that's where that word comes from. So in other words, OTs help people do whatever they want or need to do. So we really look at what is meaningful and important, and it's very individualized to that person to say, what do you need to do? What do you want to do? How can we help you do it? Even, in the midst of whatever difficulties you may have. So for children in the context of school, we would consider a child's role or occupation to be a student, and therefore, the focus would be to help that student function well within their school environment. So OT is concerned with whether they can access their academics and participate in related activities, socialize with their peers. So school-based OT, in turn, we can say, is designed to help a student with a disability maintain, improve, or restore function in all education-related activities. And like Suzanne was mentioning, there's a lot of different areas that we like to address as an OT. One of those is activities of daily living, so that would be like self-care and life skills. We look also at fine motor skills and visual motor skills, how well a child can use their eyes and hands together to complete a necessary task like writing, copying from the board, different things like that. Also, classroom behaviors, and this is a big one because oftentimes it's influenced by a student's ability to self-regulate and or process sensory information received from the environment. So we like to play a big part in this, determining what is causing that behavior and then what would be the best way to address it. So I'm now going to talk a little bit more about self-regulation and the importance of teaching this very important skill, because it actually is a skill. No one is born with the ability to self-regulate. And by definition, it's the ability to control one's thoughts, emotional responses, actions, and level of alertness or attention. So if you think about this when your child was a newborn, say, they did not have the ability to self-regulate. You had to provide some kind of co-regulation to help soothe your child. So that could look like rocking the baby, maybe using a pacifier or swaddling nice and tight. These are all different techniques that can be used to help that young child co-regulate and in turn teach self-regulation skills. Oftentimes this word, it's used synonymously with the idea of sensory processing. And it's important to know that it actually is not the same. In fact, there's many students who may exhibit intact sensory processing, so they have no difficulties with their sensory processing, but for other reasons, they may struggle with the concept of self-regulation. And then the same thing, a child can have a sensory processing difficulty, yet they found ways to self-regulate in order to maintain their attention and participate in the world around them. So it's just important to know that there is that difference between the concept of self-regulation and sensory processing. Also important to know that self-regulation is something that can fluctuate in all of us. So child, a teenager, adult, this is something we all deal with on a regular basis, and we use different strategies to help maintain this. So if you think, imagine one morning you have a very busy day, you forgot to have your morning coffee, you can expect your self-regulation skills to be affected. So you may be drowsy, you may have a low tolerance for things that annoy you. You may find it very hard to remember or recall information. Same thing if you have a bad night's sleep, or maybe you skipped a meal, or just high stress levels. You can imagine how all this impacts the ability to self-regulate. Some other influencers is physical and mental health. So perhaps like something like an ear infection or toothache would greatly impact the ability to self-regulate for reasons that you can imagine. Cognition and executive functioning skills, the different levels that a child or adult may have, will impact the ability to self-regulate. Environment, age, and gender. So like I said before, thinking about the newborn, how, and even a toddler, we wouldn't expect a 2 or 3-year-old to be able to self-regulate as well as, you know, a 11, 12-year-old or an 18-year-old, for example. Social emotional development. And lastly, sensory processing differences. So we can look at how sensory processing can be an influencer of self-regulation. And ultimately, this means the difference of being not ready to learn to being more ready to learn. Okay, so now we're going to briefly go over our sensory systems, which are responsible for processing information from the world around us and the world inside of us. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with our 5 senses. This is something we learn in grade school. Even preschoolers are now learning about the 5 senses, which are vision, taste, smell, hearing, touch. These are all sensory systems that help us process information that's coming in from the world around us. There's actually 3 more sensory systems that help us process or manage what's going on inside of our bodies. The vestibular system is one of them, the proprioceptive system is another, and the interoception system, which we're not really going to talk too much about, is the third. So we're going to look at these in a little more detail, starting with the vestibular system and how difficulties in these areas have the ability to impact functioning and therefore behavior. So the vestibular system is actually located in the inner ear, and it tells us the position of our head in space. So if you think about back when we were learning those 5 senses, you might have seen an image like this of the inner ear, and there's those semicircular canals in there, and there's fluid, and I'm really simplifying this. But basically, as you tilt or rotate your head, the fluid is drawn down by gravity to the center of the earth, and it's sending messages to your brain, letting your body know where you are in space, and if you're moving, and if you're standing still, maybe if it's telling you if you're spinning or rotating. So it gives all that kind of information to your brain to let your body know if you're moving or standing still, again, and in what position. It's responsible for things like balance, coordination, maintaining an upright posture, using bilateral skills, which is integrating like both sides of the body to complete a task. So this is a really important system, again, telling your body if you're moving in space and how. Now, thinking about this system, if there were difficulties here with the vestibular system, you would expect something pretty intense. It's called gravitational insecurity. This is like a very excessive fear of movement, which would not typically be perceived as threatening, but to a child or even adult who has this gravitational insecurity, it would seem very, very life-threatening to them. And you may see this demonstrated like on the playground. There's some kids who are extremely, much more than normal, afraid and have a fear of having their feet off the ground, like on a swing or going on a slide. Even sitting at a chair without grounding their feet could be very scary for this child, and their body is perceiving it as danger. Another just more common example would be like motion sickness. So, you know, sitting in a car, your brain is receiving messages from the positioning of your head that you're moving through space. But if your eyes are looking at a book, those messages are saying, I'm not moving, I'm looking at this stationary object. And that's why it's a good thing to look out the window. So both systems are sending the same messages to your brain. Okay, so we will look at the proprioceptive system now. So this system is actually located in the skin, the muscles, and the joints. It sends information to the brain about the position of the body parts and where they are in space and in relation to the different objects around you. And you may notice from this slide, there's different children with push, pull, heavy muscle work, stretching. These are all activities that activate the proprioceptive system because it requires heavy work or muscle work within our body, and it activates our proprioceptive system, telling our brain that these body parts are in use. Without the proprioceptive system, or when it's not functioning properly, you would expect that there would be a lot of difficulty with body awareness, knowing where, like a child may have difficulty knowing where their kind of body begins and ends. So you would expect a lot of sensory seeking behaviors, seeking out intense experiences in the environment, like running and crashing, maybe bumping into other people, not maintaining a good personal space, maybe really overstuffing the mouth, big bites, writing too hard, playing very rough. So all of these, and we'll talk about this a little more later, these are all different behaviors that could potentially be stemming from a proprioceptive system that isn't processing well enough. So difficulties with sensory processing may arise when the brain has trouble understanding, organizing, and/or prioritizing information into an adaptive response. Now, all an adaptive response means is just the body producing a response to an environmental demand, so being asked to do something, and they are responding in an appropriate or meaningful way. So if there is a difficulty in one or more of the sensory processing systems, you would expect that this would impact their ability to respond in an appropriate or meaningful way to whatever that demand may be. And I'm actually going to show a video right now of this little boy named Neil, and he's going to talk about sensory processing from his view of being a child. And he just does a really great job at it. So I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about what that looks like.
Hi, my name is Neil. I like classical music. I like to read comics. I also like to go to school. Something that I know a lot about and want to tell you about is sensory processing disorder. SPD is when the messages that your brain gets from your senses are not organized, so you don't respond to things like most people do. This makes it hard to do everyday life stuff like getting ready for the day, going to school, eating, and playing. You can have SPD by itself, or you can have it with other things like autism. I have autism and SPD. Everyone has 7 sensory systems. They are sound, taste, smell, vision, touch, proprioceptive, and vestibular. Under-responsive versus over-responsive. You can think of each your sensory systems as being a cup, and water is that type of a sensory input. If you are under-responsive to a certain sensory input, it is like you're a big, huge cup. You keep getting water to the big cup. You can just keep adding, but it never feels full. But if you are over-responsive, it is like you are a tiny cup. All you need is just a little sensory input and you overflow. You want your cup to be full and not spill over. Each of your sensory systems is their own cup and they are different sizes. Just because you have one big cup does not mean you are under-responsive with all your senses. I have a big cup for my proprioceptive and vestibular senses and a little cup for my touch, sound, taste, and smell senses. Everyone is different and unique.
Great, thank you, Neil. Isn't he adorable? I think he does such a great job at that. I don't even bother explaining it, besides him. So I love how he talks about the idea of a big cup versus a little cup. It's a really great imagery to think of. And we're going to talk just a little bit about the idea of a sensory threshold, which essentially, like Neil said, is looking at it in the terms of a cup. So a high sensory threshold, we're going to think about it as like a big cup. So a high threshold means it takes a lot of input for the brain to recognize the input from the environment. It takes a lot more than what you would expect to be usual. And you could see here the green horizontal line, that's a typical sensory threshold. And the arrow here is sensory input. So that's a typical amount of sensory input that the body needs to register that input for the brain to understand and produce an adaptive response. A high sensory threshold in relation to that requires much more sensory input in order to meet that threshold. So just like the big cup, it requires a lot more in order to fill the cup. And looking at this picture right here, it's just an image of a sensory deprivation tank. And if anyone is familiar with it, it basically removes all sensory input from your senses. So you're essentially just, it's very calming and relaxing. But after a while, when you're laying it, it's regulating your temperature. You're not hearing anything. You're not feeling anything. Your proprioceptive and vestibular systems are basically shut down at that point. It can be very relaxing, but after a while, your body feels the urge to move and to get some kind of input back. That's why you're only allowed in it for a very short period of time. And that's kind of the same idea here. A high sensory threshold, a student or a child who may have a high sensory threshold requires a lot of amount of input in that sensory area in order for the brain to register and respond. So for example, thinking about someone maybe with a high sensory threshold for the proprioceptive system, they would be actively seeking in their environment ways to activate that system. So again, it would be the crashing, difficulty grading their activity, so playing really hard and not meaning to. Maybe for the vestibular system with a high sensory threshold, there may be a lot of rocking and moving, constantly on the go. A child who loves to spin, because that has a lot of intense vestibular input. Same thing as inversion, so going upside down. These can all be behaviors that children with a high sensory threshold are seeking out so that they're able to meet the need that their body has. Okay, in contrast, we'll look at a low sensory threshold. So this is thinking about a small cup. So like we said, that typical sensory threshold, this is the typical amount of sensory input from the environment. For a child with a low sensory threshold, they actually require very minimal sensory input to reach their threshold. So anything more than that can seem very noxious and overstimulating. So just a little sensory input could send the nervous system into feeling very unsafe and trigger this idea of a fight, flight, or fright response, which you may be familiar with. And basically what that is your brain it's a very primitive response informing your brain that I am in trouble, I am in danger, this is life-threatening. And your prefrontal cortex, which is where all the good decision making occurs, gets shut down. And this primitive area of the brain takes over, and basically survival is key. So you can imagine that a child who is stuck in this low sensory threshold in a certain area, let's talk about like maybe auditory system, which is our hearing. If they have a low sensory threshold, a small cup, it takes a very little bit amount of sensory auditory or input through the ears for them to be overwhelmed and overstimulated. And something like singing or maybe music just played from a radio or in the car, they may cover their ears because it's way too much, and they're now in this place of fight, flight, or fright where they feel like I need to get out of here because I am in danger, and that's what their body is actually telling them in a sense. And like I spoke about before, gravitational insecurity, that's another example of low sensory threshold where they feel like they are in danger when they don't feel grounded to the earth because their vestibular system is overstimulated much more than what you would find typical. So these kind of children, they would maybe avoid messes, they would dislike touch, even a little touch could be like, may respond like they are in pain from just like a little touch or a little bump. They may cover their ears. They may avoid motor tasks that requires them to move through space. They may avoid loud sounds, which others may tolerate more typically. So these are all examples of a child who may have a low sensory threshold in one or more sensory processing areas. Just now, I think this is really important to talk about about when to be concerned about a behavior, because right now we're spending a lot of time on the idea of sensory processing and how that could be an influencer of behavior, but there's actually many other factors that can motivate a behavior. And just some important questions to ask from the beginning is, number one, is the behavior interfering with function and participation? So this is what we'll look at and say, okay, so the child is rocking. Is this a need that the child has in order to self-regulate and cope and actively cope? Or is it something that is getting in the way and they're unable to participate and follow directions? So it's kind of asking yourself that question. Is it really impacting function and behavior, or is it just unusual? And perhaps if it's unusual, it may just be something that the child is using to self-regulate. We can keep that behavior, or we can possibly try to find something that may be more appropriate as a replacement behavior. But it's important to understand that every behavior serves a purpose. We can not just eliminate it without finding something else that may be more appropriate, or understanding why the behavior is occurring in the first place. Also asking ourselves, is addressing it a priority concern? So, there might be other safety concerns that are more important than rocking. Maybe there's self-injurious behaviors that are going on. That might be more of a priority concern. Instead of dealing with many different behaviors at once, we can select which one will produce the most, the best outcome for your child. And then lastly, this is very important, what is driving the behavior? So oftentimes the following question is asked regarding a challenging behavior. We may say, is it sensory or behavior? You may hear that a lot. And the question is actually not, is it sensory or behavior? The question is, what appears to be driving the behavior? Because like I said before, children communicate their needs through behaviors. And if you could determine what's motivating a challenging behavior, you can then address it in a more effective way. So I'm just going to show you just a few different functions of behavior that we can explore. So the first is the idea of escape. Okay, so a behavior can be driven by the desire to escape or avoid a non-preferred or an undesirable activity or an interaction. So you may see some kids that have that little cup or low sensory threshold. Oftentimes their behavior is due to their need to escape something that is noxious to them, so they cannot tolerate it, or they just don't like doing, that activity. For example, like in the schools, you may see during math class, when math is about to start, all of a sudden a child starts acting out because they like to get removed from the classroom and then they get to miss their math class. So the idea is the behavior is occurring out of a need to escape from a certain non-preferred activity. There's different ways that you can respond to this in a more appropriate and positive way. That could be to teach the child to request a break when needed, or to make the activity more tolerable in different ways. Simplifying the task, breaking it down into smaller parts, making it fun and enjoyable for the child, and supporting them in those different ways. So another way would be for attention. So a behavior can be driven by the desire for attention from others. And this can, obviously occurs when someone wants that social interaction. A good note here is when you see a child reacting in a certain way, and you notice when you give them the attention, they stop. You can try to do more reinforcing positive behaviors. And when the child's doing something that is preferred, more positive behaviors the child's demonstrating, you can then reinforce them with a lot of praise and attention, and give them that interaction that they're looking for. Okay, the next would be tangible. So this one is really easy. It basically means the child wants something, so they're acting out or demonstrating a behavior because they want something, such as an iPad or recess or whatever it may be. Maybe in the home it's a food that they really like, or again, a screen time, whatever it may be. And that's an easy one. You can respond to that by providing some way for them to earn something desirable, again, by demonstrating positive behaviors, or a first then board, or creating like a token economy. And these are all things that we could talk about a little bit later. And lastly, sensory, and we talked a lot about this before. This is, when the child is actually looking to self-regulate due to a need with their one or more of their sensory processing systems. And you can respond to this by teaching a functional replacement behavior. that provides them a similar sensory experience that helps them to feel good and safe and helps them to self-regulate. So for example, a child who may put everything in their mouth, very orally fixated, instead of just saying no, 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 and providing them no outlet for that, we can then say, well, what could be appropriate? Maybe it's a chewy tube, which is a tool that it's for a child to chew on and give that oral sensory input. Or maybe providing different snack breaks with chewy or crunchy food. Maybe if it's an older child, you can give gum, and that will replace, it's a much more appropriate way to replace, say, chewing on their shirt or different objects in their environment. Okay, and just as, you know, a side note here, I thought this is really important to bring up since we're talking about behavior, and because of the times we're in, which are definitely, you know, specifically surrounding COVID, even just the racial unrest that's affecting many of our communities, our schools, and our families at this point, our lives, you know, it's changed so drastically, so quickly, our child's lives as well. And it would be expected that some of our children are experiencing or have experienced trauma in some way related to what's going on in our world. Even the perception of trauma can produce the same reaction. So even if it's not really a big deal, but they're perceiving it to be a major traumatic episode in their life, it can still leave a major impact. So just some notes, you know, following exposure to trauma, children may become stuck in that heightened state of alertness and or state of fear. Like we spoke about before, the fight, flight, or fright response, that response and that behavior related to that could be affected by trauma. The brain is stuck in that place. And a really good way, besides getting some, you know, professional help if that's needed, the idea of fostering and building resiliency is extremely important in these cases. Really, it benefits all children because we know through our life there's going to be many ups and downs. So this is a really great skill. And basically, it's the ability to bounce back, you know, despite adversity. So the idea of resiliency and different ways that you can do this is definitely establishing supportive adult-child relationships. So establishing trust and safety. Also offering a choice. The idea of self-efficacy and perceived control. So giving the child a choice is really important to their self-confidence and understanding that I can decide what happens to me and I can make a difference in my own life. Also, adaptive skills, self-regulatory capacities, that's basically just giving them the tools they need to self-regulate and self-control. And then also the idea of sources of faith, hope, cultural traditions. So exploring different ways that they can find hope and bring meaning and comfort to your family is really important. So I am going to end right here, and I'm going to pass it on to Jackie, who's going to talk a little bit more about parents and how you can specifically get involved, as well as share some of those supports with you.
Hello, good evening. So as Suzanne mentioned in the beginning, you are our partners, and especially now more than ever with our current service delivery model, it really provides you a unique opportunity for families to get involved during a child's related service. And when I mean related service, I'm not only saying occupational therapy, I'm saying speech therapy as well as physical therapy. And we encourage this important collaboration as you are our partners. We have heard from countless speech, physical therapists, as well as other occupational therapy providers that they are now collaborating with families like never before. They're developing a deeper relationship and understanding between a related service provider, a child, and trusted adult is important in producing positive outcomes and gains, and that's exactly what we want to see. So active family participation during related service offers you a chance to get to know your child's related service provider, and please don't be afraid to ask lots of questions. You can experience therapy sessions firsthand, and it's essential and it's completely essential for carryover skills. As a therapist, we'll provide you with strategies based on your child's specific needs and home environment, which the hope is for that it would impact the remote learning experience and the overall school functioning. You are able to continue using these strategies to provide provided by the related service, even when the session has ended, which is exactly what we want to see, because you as parent and guardians become an extension of us, of the therapist, by assisting with sessions as needed. And under the therapist guidance, you may be able to provide your child with verbal, tactile prompting, demonstration of a certain skill, managing or organizing materials, cueing to attend the task at hand, which is completely essential in creating what we call the just right challenge. And when I say just right challenge, so during an activity, you don't want to make the task either too hard or too easy for your child. You want it to be just right, because when that just right challenge, or zone, as we sometimes refer to it as well, that's where the growth begins. So now, what supports can we use to provide your child with that just right challenge? So in the slides now to follow, we will be providing you with several sensory supports in the slides to come. So for example, if we can go to the next slide, what are sensory supports? So sensory supports are tools or strategies that you would use to help your child cope and thrive at home. And how the million-dollar question for me that I know that you have as parents is now that we've provided with you with all this information and we're going to be providing you with these supports, now how can you help your child? And that's exactly what we want to equip and empower you to do. So if your child seems to be overstimulated, as Kristyn mentioned, that would be a child that you would see reach that high threshold or high intensity. You would use the recommendation, the suggestion would be to use calming tools or strategies. And then for children who seem understimulated, as Kristyn mentioned, that would have a child that would have a low threshold or low intensity, you would use a variety of tools or strategies that will be alerting. So now, this is the next part that we want to take you in. How can we decide, right? How can we do what supports to use and how can they be implemented at home? So right now we're going to do the detective work. So if you see that if you suspect, and from looking at what Kristyn mentioned in the previous slide, if you see your child is presenting signs or characteristics of overstimulated, the following is what you will see in your child. You would either notice that your child might be unfocused, unable to remain seated, fidgety, frequently talking, interrupting others, and is also having a difficulty with turn taking. So that's something for you to be aware of in your detective work and try to determine which tools or strategies will be able to help support your child. So the next one, if you notice your child is understimulated, some characteristics that you might notice are the following: that your child is lethargic, sleeping, has difficulty engaging in activity. And another big one is that they will have a low motivation to participate, which, as we know, sometimes it could be very frustrating because it might be, it's that detective work that we trying to equip you to be able to do to determine what sensory supports would produce the most positive outcomes and gains. So that is absolutely essential in order for you to determine which supports you would be selecting to use with your child. In the next slide. And something that I want to say before I keep showing you different types of sensory support that I want you to know is to please know that it is vital for you to use all the suggested supports that we will be providing you with in the slides to come in a structured and organized manner. We are going to provide you with some guidance towards the end as well of the presentation to assist you with successfully implementing these tools and strategies that we're recommending or suggesting for the home. Something that I've learned, throughout the years is that children don't like structure, but they crave it. So it is absolutely necessary that when you do use these supports, that you use it in an organized and structured way. And this is something hopefully that we're going to equip you today for you to be able to do it. So when you're trying to select a sensory support, for example, for a child that you want to provide them with a calming and just right activity, a characteristics that you want to notice in selecting this support is for it to be rhythmic, deep, controlled, and slow. So for supports under the tactile, for example, you want to provide the deep pressure on the hands, arms, and we call that dots and squeezies. And for every highlighted, under every category, I'm going to show you pictures to follow, because sometimes it's a little hard to be able to just see the words, but when you visualize it, it makes it easier to understand what we're talking about. We're not only going to provide you with visuals for some of the ones that we feel that maybe you're unfamiliar with, but we're also going to provide you with brief little videos so you can get an idea of what it is. The next one is beanbag chair, squeeze. If you can't find a beanbag chair, you can do bear hugs, as well as use squeeze toys and household items, which is something that we're also trying to provide you with, because we don't want you to have to buy everything. We want you to also use what you have at home, which is something that providers in general are becoming more and more innovative in using telehealth, teletherapy as a treatment, using household items. Next one for tactile is pressure garment, or you could use a neoprene vest. For probe, in order to provide your child with a support that would provide them with probe, you can use heavy objects, as well as have them do push-ups towards the wall, not on the floor, but on the wall. Carrying weighted backpack, or you can, a household item that you can use is a laundry basket, or helping you take out the garbage bag, which I know a lot of you would love. Just make it a little extra heavy in order to provide them with that deep probe input. Another activity that would provide them with that probe is being able to use an elastic rope tied around the chair and be able to pull it. Because one thing that we do use in school are desk foot fidget, but now for the home, you'll see in the picture to follow how you can use this at home. Next one is you can do, as I mentioned, wall push-ups, but you can also do it with the chair. In order to provide vestibular input, you can use a rocking chair. If you don't have a rocking chair at home, you can use your playground equipment, and thankfully the parks are open. So now this is something, if you don't have at home, that you can use at the park, you can use a swing. It's important in order for the jumping for it to be rhythmic, because you want them to provide that just right challenge. But remember, we're providing supports that will help them calm. Another one would be windmills or alternating toe touches, and I'll show you in the slides to follow. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a picture of the deep pressures on the hands with what we call dots and squeezes. So what you would do is that you would take, whether your dominant hand, and provide pressure all across your hand, starting from your thumb all the way down to each. You want to get from the middle, working yourself right up to each finger. One thing that we do use in school, and they do sell them, are pressure vests. But as I mentioned, you can use a neoprene vest, or you can also find in your local store or buy it online, those pressure vests, like the ones that they wear, that a child would wear in order for swimming, that also provides that deep probe input into their body. The lap, as you can see, the lap weight, one that you can use at home. If you have the compress, you can use a cold or warm compress. It doesn't have to be cold or hot. It could be room temperature, but putting it across the lap will serve the same function as a regular lap weight as well. And the next slide. This is a picture of a beanbag chair. You can easily order it online. You can provide a good old bear hug and just make sure that you get a tight squeeze around and give them that deep, as Kristyn was mentioning, that deep probe input. You can, if you don't have a squeeze toy at home, you can use any household item that they can squeeze. One common one that people have said that is helpful is using an empty bottle and literally being able to press the lid up and down. And that is you're getting good input to your muscles in your hands and getting that deep input. The desk fidget, as I mentioned, was a common one that we use at school, but at home, as you can see in the picture to the far right, you can take a jump rope. Just make sure that is an elastic. This child is just, you can tie it just how we do it at school, or you could make it longer and extend it, and they can get, the longer you get it, the more you get to press it, they'll get more input into their muscle, the longer you extend it. In the picture below that you can see is windmills. And fortunately, I couldn't find a picture of a child, but this is something that is commonly done in the military, as you can see in the Army. But this will give them good vestibular input because you're doing different movement and it's giving them input into their ears of vestibular movement. And the next slide. For alerting and just right activity, the characteristics that you want to look for is that these activities or tools are arrhythmic, fast, and unpredictable. For under tactile, you can do hand rubbing, use a stress ball with rice or sand play. You can attach Velcro at the bottom of your desk at home. You can do it at the bottom of the table where your child sits or their desk at home. You can do self-padding on the arms and legs. Jump and crash is exactly what it is, literally jumping, but make sure that when you do promote the jumping, again, that it's arrhythmic, fast, and unpredictable. And crashing, you can do it on the sofa or in a safe, they can crash on the beanbag and get that input, that tactile input as well. For proprioception, you can do frog jumps. It's literally the child would get into a frog-like position and jump up and down, again, arrhythmic. You can do mountain climbers, and I'll show you in the slides to follow. You can do desk or table jumps, tug of war, and that, as Kristyn mentioned earlier, partner hand push, and you'll be getting that good probe input. For vestibular, you can do jump, squat and turns, squat burpees, the washing machine fast slide. And for all of you that might not know what it is, I'll show you in the pictures to follow, as well as a picture of a rocking horse, which is known as Rolasana. You can do our good old head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and you'll be getting that vestibular input by doing this activity. So here's a picture of how we would do it in school, that we would put the desk fidget underneath there, wherever your child sits at school. But at home, as you can see on the farther right, you can literally, you can pick up Velcro at any local store. And the nice part about the Velcro is that it has two sides. So they'll get the smooth, and then there's a little bit of that rough. So they'll be getting two types of input. The next one is the mountain climber. It's literally like being like if you're gonna do in a position to do a push-up, and instead of moving your hands up and down, you're literally alternating both your right and leg foot with your hand still. And then the third picture is the partner hand push, as Kristyn showed us, which will give us that good probe input into our joints and our muscles. The next slide, we have a picture of the squats and burpees. So you literally start with a stand position, going down to semi half kneel into what looks like you're gonna do a push up, and then going all the way down. It's like a frog jump up is the fifth person. So that's an example of a frog jump, and then you jump up, and then you repeat the cycle again. The next picture is a picture of a washing machine and a fast side twist. And then the third picture is a picture of a rocking horse. The next slide. So these are supports for our auditory, visual, and oral input. And as Kristyn mentioned, this being 3 out of our 5 senses that she mentioned are typical sensory. So for hearing, we recommend what we call hemisync music, and then the slides to follow will give you a preview of what that would be, or rhythmic bass music, as well as metronome, chanting or core response songs, white noise, or nature noise. And these all can be found online for free, and we'll give you a demonstration of it. For visual, you can trace a figure 8, you can do dim lights, muted lights, colored overlays or transparencies, as well as visual tracking posters, or play our good old I Spy game. For taste, you can use blowing or sucking on a straw. For more input, you can use what we call camelback, which will show you a picture, a suction water bottle. You can do crunchy or chewy foods, as well as use an electric toothbrush, which will give you more input to the mouth, sound breaths, or deep breaths. The next slide. So really quickly, the first one is a preview of what a hemisync means. The next one is metronome. As you see, it's a beat, and it's very calm. And the next one is. So these are just different tools that you can use for children who have auditory sensitivity, and it's very grounding. This is a visual of tracing a figure 8. They have ones that you can print online, but you can literally do it yourself. Literally put the arrows in which they can just literally trace around, and you start and just literally tracing it. You will go in one direction from the green to the blue, right back to in the center and going around. And literally you're making a big 8. A great one is the colored overlays and transparencies. As you can see there, it provides them with a visual because it's overstimulating for a child who gets easily distracted. In order for them to, it blocks out the words, and they are just focused on it by focusing on one row. We can go to the next one, Kristyn. This is an example of a camelback, and as you can see there, the straw is very thick. So in order for them, it's a different experience for them to use a regular straw versus a camelback straw, because a camelback straw provides them more oral input to their mouth. For the deep breathing, the 6 sides of breathing, you can print this online as well as make it yourself. You would start off right where the star is. Using your index finger, you would breathe in, go up, and you stop, take a nice deep breath, go back down and you hold and breathe out, breathe in again, hold, and breathe out. And this is an excellent visual for children who get very anxious, and it helps them learn to control their breath. It's an excellent tool. The next one are tabletop tasks that you can use at home. And as you can see, sometimes several of some tools or strategies that we recommend will fall under this different categories, but they have multi-purposes. So that's great. So once you have something, it could fall under different categories for you to be able to use it. So as you can see here, we have the therapy ball, which is very similar to having them sit because they're getting that input on a wedge or move state, but it's different. It's a different sensation. So in the case, if you don't have a move and sit cushion, you can use a small decorative pillow or cut out a piece of foam. Another great thing to have for tabletop task at home is creating your own fidget bin. As well, as you can see here is one that's repeated, the Velcro underneath the bottom of the chair or the table, and the visual timer. And something very important to incorporate is a movement break especially after a long life lesson at home. The next slide. So as you can see here is a picture of the therapy ball and the wedge seat. The next one is a small pillow or foam, and then an example of a fidget bin that you can create at home. On the left is a picture of a visual timer. This visual timer is a great timer because it gives them a sense of how much time, and it helps them, and it eases that anxiety too as well when they just lose track of time, but at the same way it gets them organized. This is an example of a movement break that you can incorporate right after a live lesson.
What's up, my mammals? This is Sid the Sloth from the movie Ice Age, and we're about to do this new dance, the Continental Drift. It's time to get up on your feet. It's easy to do. Just follow me. Move it out. Do the Sid. Take it back. And do the Sid. Step left. Then drift. Step right.
So we just wanted to give you a little example, and this is you can go on YouTube, and you can, if it's a younger child, you can Google their probably a famous movie that is out there. As you can see, this is Ice Age, and they always a good bulk of the time come up with great movement breaks that you can just literally download from online, as well as for the older kids as well, for middle and high school students. These are different reading and writing supports that you can use. A pencil grip, if you don't have a pencil grip, you can take a masking tape and literally put it at the end of the pencil, and that'll give them helps them what we call have that tripod grasp, which is taking your index, your middle, and your thumb, and it's providing them that support and giving them that extra grip. You can use a weighted pen as well, wrist weights, a slant board, and if you don't have a slant board, you can use a 3-inch binder, and we'll show you. A study corral is something that we help them to try to take away external, any distractions. But if you don't have one, you can use a trifold display board. You can use noise reducing headphones, which you can buy. They sell them in Home Depot or on Amazon. Colored overlays, as we had previously showed you. Other things that you can use for transitions at home are picture schedule, transitional songs or sounds. You can provide your child with 5-minute warnings, and that is always helpful in helping them transition. You can create a sensory corner or a rest stop in a quiet room at home. Change the lighting, as well as you can see another that we're repeating again that you can use it as a transition at home is a visual timer again. The next slide. So this, as you can see, the slant board, you can use the 3-inch binder, and what you can take is masking tape and put it on the top, and which will hold down the paper. So that's one way that you can adapt that at home. There's a picture of the study corral, but then you can take a trifold board and it'll do the same function. And what you want, if it's too high, you can cut it in half. And at the end, you can see a picture of the noise reducing headphones. The next slide. So this is a calming corner that you will typically see at school. But again, here we are at home. So this is when we'll take what we have, and then look how beautiful on the right. You can create your own calming corner for your child. You can put the decorative pillows. You can put that basket on as a fidget bin as well on one side, and put in different size pillows, different textures. And as you can see, they got very creative, and they did a wonderful job at home. And it has the same function that it does at school. But obviously in school, we're putting a little bit more stuff on them, but at home you can really imitate it. And there's so many ways that you can look in Pinterest. There's a lot of creative ideas online. The next slide, Kristyn. So for our middle and high school students, right, things might look a little different. So as Kristyn mentioned, for oral, you can provide gum because it gives them that, what we call the deep probe input, dry fruit, strong flavors for lunch and snack. If you're trying to, in order to provide them with more tactile and probe input, you can do heavy work such as wrestling, football, karate, swimming, gymnastics, aerobics, weightlifting. You know how media draws our middle and high school students. So you can use their good old use a connect dance that is very enticing for our adolescents, as well as sport games. You can do dancing, ballet, choreographed routines. Again, you want that structure. You can incorporate yoga and meditation, which you can easily find online as well. Fidgets, there's no age to fidgets, but it looks different for them. So you can do, and we'll show you examples of a fidget that you can use for an older child, for a pencil topper, as well as putting items in their binder. For auditory, you can use classical music, as well as that heavy bass beats or arrhythmic sounds, as we previously suggested. And for visual, changing the lighting throughout the day does do wonders, as well as using covered overlays. The most important thing that we want you that we highly suggest is that you empower your child by teaching them to identify their sensory needs. They're their greatest, they are the best detective ever in letting us know exactly what they need. You want preferred activities and goals as well. So this is just for those of you that have never been exposed to kinetic dance. This is just a little preview of what it is. And it's connected to the Y, to the we. Oh, it's unavailable. I thought it. Oh man. Okay. But if you literally, it's on YouTube. And if you just type in kinetic dance, you'll get an example of what it is. So I'm sorry about that. The next one, that, as you can see, that I mentioned, the 3-inch binder. If you put different fidgets of their favorite fidgets in there and literally put it inside their binder, they'll have it available during, the moments where they need it. And this is an example of a pencil topper with different types of fidgets right on the top as well. So now that we provided you with a plethora of supports, as I mentioned, how important it is for you to be able to do it in a structured and organized manner. So this is an example of a sensory support that you can do at home for your child that might be overstimulated. You could, for a morning routine, you could incorporate deep breaths as well as a gentle stretch, drinking from a straw, or eating those chewy and crunchy foods. For that pickup afternoon, you can go to the park or do a quick bike or scooter ride. Then for homework or dinner, you want to be able to incorporate that heavy work or chores, like as we previously mentioned, carrying that laundry basket. For grooming, provide, deep pressure lotion massage. We know it's the summer, but that warm bath always does wonders, as well as the gentle joint compression. And then for bedtime, incorporating a story time and getting that vestibular input using light but arrhythmic, a rocking chair or a weighted blanket, as well as use as the recommended any music for relaxation. So this is one way that you can implement it. Another way that you can implement it is using different types of visual schedules. And this is literally one that you can put right there in that calming corner and just have it. Those visual schedules that you can put in the different what they're doing throughout the day, you can find them. I've seen them in the 99-cent store. They're not as sturdy, but they do the same function, and you can create yourself as well when at home. You can use the sensory cards, which will provide you now towards the end. There's a website that you can print them out, and you can use magnets and attach them to the refrigerator, or you can also create yourself a daily one for your child. So these are home activities that you can use. We gave you a link for yoga on YouTube, as well as there's this beautiful website that was created by two of our occupational therapists. Their OT Partnership with Parents website is an excellent resource. Goal Noodle is a wonderful website that you can use for movement breaks. It is free, and there's kids love it, and it's applicable for children of all ages. A great resource is the OT Toolbox. There's a plethora of resources there, and we put in a breathing video on YouTube, as well as free printable breathing cards and sensory cards as well. So thank you so much for partnering with us and for taking your time tonight to be with us. We are grateful for your partnership, and we couldn't do this without you. We really couldn't. So now, if you have any questions.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And thanks so much, Kristyn. Jackie, I got to show you. I've been using my soap dispenser thing as a fidget at home.
Yeah, awesome, Jose.
I need that pressure. And then when you were mentioning changing light, I'll see if I can lower this one. I have this this lamp from Amazon was $15, and it has different settings on the top, so I can dim the lights as much as I need to, and I can change it from different intensity. So if you can see more on my face than anything, but orange light, yellow light. So they don't have to be high-tech things, folks. This was $15 on Amazon. Suzanne, any closing thoughts? We have run a little over, but I think folks aren't going to be too upset that we ran over. I think you have to unmute yourself, Suzanne.
Lots of questions about the PowerPoint, Jose.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will be uploading the PowerPoints and this presentation we've been recording. We just have to send them to translation first. And so all of you will get an email once those are translated and available on the DOE website. All right. Other than that, Suzanne, any closing thoughts?
I will say that there's a few family members here that we're going to be in contact with tomorrow. The OT team will be in contact and follow up with a few families here. So we're so glad for their participation. And I think Jackie and Kristyn really just the information they gave is so useful and important. And one of the points that stuck out to me was around the detective work. And children can be over-responsive and under-responsive. And the OT team here at the Department of Education is happy to partner with parents in doing some of that detective work. So thanks everyone.
Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you again for all of you for joining us. Thank you for rolling with the punches and for being patient, understanding about our technical difficulties on Wednesday. Our next session is this coming Wednesday, July 1, and it's about reading strategies. I've dropped the link into the chat. So reading strategies for parents. We're going to be hearing from our instruction team. So I hope to see you then. Please don't forget to register because if you don't register, you won't get the link.
I want to go back.
All right. Talk to you all next time. Until Wednesday. Stay safe and see you all later.
Thanks, Jose. Thank you.